Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in today's video, we're talking about what's new for Plasticity 2025. Now, specifically version 25.1, which is the first release of this new version. In this video, we'll talk about what's changed in the UI, some of the new commands, as well as updates to other commands that have existed in Plasticity for a while. Now, if you're just new to Plasticity and you're trying to figure out how to use it, I'll leave a couple of links in the description to some of our getting started content. This is done in version 24, but we will be updating content for version 25 as well. So if you like the style of our videos and you want some new content, make sure that you subscribe to the channel because we'll be releasing that in the next week or so. So to get started, first, the UI. The UI is probably the first thing that we're going to notice. The change in color from purple to green is obviously one that sticks out right away. But in general, access to our tools is probably the bigger thing that's changed. The first thing that we want to identify from the P menu is that we have a recent files that also includes thumbnails. Now, these thumbnails are based on the last saved image of our design, but one of the benefits of this recent files menu is the ability to drag and drop those into our design. So this is a great and quick way for us to bring in objects. And let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and rotate that, go to a side view, and move it up into place, scale it. And now it was a way that we could quickly add this into our design. So that's a big benefit, especially if you use some form of kit bashing or building models from common files that you have. You now have the ability to use that recent files menu as long as you've saved good final versions of that file where you have a thumbnail. You can quickly and easily bring those into your designs. I'm going to go ahead and hop to another file and talk about some of the other changes to the new UI. First, I'm going to go into our preferences menu. Note that there have been some changes to appearance options. We have a grid color option now. We can configure some of the UI elements like control point sizes and vertice sizes. And we also have this UI standard spacing, which is going to be essentially a corner padding for some of these UI elements like the panels on the left and the right. So this is a nice feature, especially if you're working with a monitor where you find the program starts to creep over to the edges. It could be nice to just pad those in a little bit. Some of the other changes, there have been updates to Space Mouse support. Now, there's nothing here in the user preferences, but you can manually configure the JSON file to configure the buttons on your Space Mouse device. That's, again, something that you can do in 2025 that wasn't really available in 24. Under the general section, we have the ability now to toggle off options to automatically invoke commands. I'm not really sure why you would turn that off because it's super helpful, but you can toggle that off. You can also now toggle on an option for checking updates on startup. This is one of my previous pet peeves is really knowing when there was an update to Plasticity. So having this is a nice option for me. And in the advanced section, we can now disable the ability to save and reload an active scene on startup. So oftentimes when I'm modeling and just playing around and I don't save a file, I just close it. It's nice to have the ability to reopen Plasticity and continue to work on that file. If you do toggle that off, I would strongly suggest you get comfortable just saving very often. With that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the sidebars on the left and the right. We've got a button at the top that allows us to quickly hide and show those sidebars. There have been some changes. So for example, in this asset section, we can right click and select all with this material. So if you're using common materials for things like hardware or certain objects in your designs, this can be a great way to quickly and easily select those. We still have all the same options for things like creating groups, but you'll notice the group selected option is at the top where I believe it used to be at the bottom in version 24. So keep in mind that you can expand and collapse all, and there are some options up here, but again, those have just simply changed locations. On the right side, there have been some changes to access to what we see in these panels. In version 24, we needed to right click on render mode. This menu was just a little bit to the left. Now it's just available here below us. We can minimize and expand it. There's even a section for custom matte caps if you want, but it's nice to be able to toggle on and off these things just quickly and easily. There's a camera section, there's a section for grids, the unit. We also have some object snaps. Control point snap is a new option for 25, with a section for added planes. And then at the very bottom, we've got this selection section. So if things are going to be essentially too large to fit on the screen, you'll have to scroll up and down. But once again, if you don't use things like changing the field of view for the camera, you can minimize these and not have them shown. So that way everything fits in the screen. The view cube's still here, but it has changed because if we click on it a second time, it's going to jump to the opposite view that we're on. So front to back, top to bottom, left to right, for example. So that's nice. And what we had to do in 24 was hold down Alt and use the middle mouse button to quickly snap through those views. Or if you're using a numpad, you can use Control and the number to go to the opposite view, for example. So that's just a nice option, a nice change that's not super drastic, but it is very helpful. One of the bigger changes, because these are, in my mind, somewhat minor, it's just different ways that we access these tools, but one of the bigger changes is the fact that the access to our tools, things like extrudes, revolves, arrays, that has fundamentally changed. So things that were always at the bottom left are now going to be in the bottom center. The access to things like our curves and primitives, this can be docked on the right or the left, where in the past it was just fixed on the right-hand side. And access to our tools for our search command is now using this small magnifier icon or the F key, which is the same as 2024. But the three-dot icon is actually something called our suggested commands. So in the older version, when we made a selection, any of the contextual tools would be available to us and pop up on the bottom right, and we could still use F to find those commands. Now, our suggested commands are going to give us these contextual tools. So things that we can use in this case based on my selection, pipe, thick and hollow, for example. Things that are not available, you can see that there is an icon that changes when we hover over them and they're grayed out. That menu can also be found using Shift and F. So again, F to search and Shift and F for our suggested or contextual commands. With that in mind, I also want to note that we now have access to the help file directly. So if you click on the small I icon here, or if you go to the three dots on the right-hand side of a command, you can get to the documentation, which is a shortcut to the Plasticity website where we have that information. So this is a nice addition. And with that, there are also some tools that now have tooltips available. Now, this is not universal across the board, and the link in the description to the Plasticity What's New site on their information will list everything that has these tooltips available. But for new features, they've been added, and for some features like fillet, they'll be there as well. So it's pretty helpful to be able to get access to those. So for example, if I say fillet, you can see that this is here, and under shape, you can see that there is a tooltip here that has both the graphic and a little statement underneath it telling us what it does. So those are very big additions, I think, because access to tooltips as well as access to help on each specific tool is just something that was missing. And the last thing that I want to mention based on the UI is this little purple dot, which is going to be nearly impossible to see. If we go up to our preferences and go to our appearance, I'm going to change this to this orange color, maybe make it a little bit easier to see. So that is our focal point for rotating. So the rotation hasn't changed in the way that it functions, but the focal point is now visible on the screen. So whether or not that's helpful to you, I can't really say, but that is based on that supporting color, and it is that little dot that's displayed. Purple, for whatever reason, is just extremely hard to see. So if that is helpful to you, I suggest changing that supporting color to something just a little bit brighter. All right, so that is the end of our UI updates. Now let's talk a little bit about two new commands, the slide command and section analysis. Section analysis is something that is pretty big for me. It's something that I wished was in Plasticity for quite a while. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a construction plane, and I'm going to select the section analysis tool. It lets me pull through the model based on my selection. We can also use things like a planar selection, for example, the side face, and then I can just drag through the model. So once again, this is an extremely handy feature. If we right-click to accept it, the section view will stay, allowing us to continue to work on the model and be able to see inside of it. So that is something, again, that I thought was huge, and I'm really glad that they added that to Plasticity for version 25. It makes modeling designs that are going to be 3D print in place, for example, or designs that have a lot of internal features. It's going to make that process much easier. What we had to do in the past is potentially turn off faces, and that way we could see inside the model, but that can be very difficult to do. And the other new tool is a tool called Slide. And to show this, I'm just going to create a curve. I'm going to go ahead and just add a couple of CVs here. And the Slide tool we can find by using Slide. There's a shortcut key, Shift and G. But essentially what the Slide tool is it allows us to move CVs that are either going to be on a surface hull, or in this case, CVs for a spline curve. And we can move them along the direction of the curve itself. So you can see here, the CV control is moving in this direction, or we've got a vector that is going to be normal to that direction of curvature. So this is extremely handy for manipulating CVs, because if we just use the move tool and we're trying to move in plane, we don't really have a great way to move along that CV direction. So again, that Slide tool, which is going to be Shift and G, that's going to allow us to move along those directions for both CVs on a spline as well as surface hulls. So really happy to have that as a new option. We're going to have to play around with it a bit more to see how useful it is. But the fact that it's an option now is important, because now we can move along those directions without having to do it based on an eyeball approximation. Okay, so now that we've seen everything that's changed in the UI, as well as the two new commands, slide and section analysis, let's dive into probably the bigger changes that have happened to existing tools. So I'm going to hop into a different file. We're going to go to our recent files, hop into what's new 25. And we're going to first talk about the square command. The square command is something that's been in Plasticity for a while. Keep in mind that some of the things that we're going to see are only available inside of the Studio license. So XNurbs, Square, these are tools that are based on XNurbs functionality. So if you are in the Indie license, you may not have access to them. But the square command, as well as XNurbs, has gotten a handful of updates this year. So the first thing we want to do is I'm going to select an opening here, and I'm going to go to my square command, and I want to talk about the change to continuity. So default G0 continuity is connected, meaning that no tangency input is happening from the surrounding edges. The free version is going to be connected, but giving us a better quality surface. So you can see that there is a change or a variation here on the edge. If I accept that, this is going to give me the lowest sort of, or the best quality surface, but note that it's taking some liberties with these edges here. And so what that means is if you are just trying to create a general surface inside of that patch, you may be able to use that free option. Now, if you are using G1 or G2 continuity, we also have some new options for things like tension. So the tension option, if we look at the CVs in the center, are going to control things like how close the CVs get in the center of our surface. Keep in mind that the number of degrees and spans added are going to have a direct impact on the flatness as well as the tension settings. So the more CVs we add, the change that happens in the middle of this can start to bunch up those CVs a bit more. So you can get to a situation where you're getting basically a result that's probably not going to be as high quality as surface. So keep in mind that you need to play around with these and figure out whether or not the number of degrees and spans you add is going to negatively impact the surface. So you can see here that the tension and the flatness, as it's increased with a large number of degrees and spans, is going to give us a poor quality surface in the center. So you will have to play around with these, but the update for continuity has been added to the square tool. The update for tension, as well as some of the other options that we have here, are going to be universal for both the square tool as well as with XNurbs. So the other thing I want to mention here, and I'm going to do the square tool again, is the update to our boundary condition. This is one of those areas where we now have a tooltip, which is extremely helpful. The new boundary condition is going to allow us to take into account the trimmed surface. So as we take a look at this adjacent option, the CVs are following the direction of the trimmed surface on both edges. If I go to something like a natural or a normal, these are going to be going the direction of the edge itself, and it's not taking into account the trimmed edge of our surface. So the new option for adjacent, again, is a welcomed addition, especially when we're trying to create these surfaces that have nice flow and edge continuity. Another thing that has changed is we now have the ability to select, let's go ahead and select this fillet face here. I'm going to invoke the square command. And now we get what's called a refit face tool. So this refit face tool gives us the ability to reconfigure a selected four-sided patch. We can change the flatness, we can increase the degrees and spans, we can play around with the weight value and get a different result for that geometry. Keep in mind when this happens, what it's actually doing is removing the original face, and that is going to need to be joined back to the main body. Now, while I do have these CVs displayed on the screen, I do want to talk quickly about some other updates that have happened that are outside of the square tool. But for example, we now have proportional editing. So if we select a CV and we use the move command, we've got this proportional option. So for example, if I just move a single CV, you can see how it's pulling up the shape. If I use the proportional option, it's going to be drastically moving all of the CVs, giving us more of a soft change in the overall shape. Now, this only works because this is not connected to the surrounding geometry. If I were to join these two together first, and then try to manipulate the CV using a proportional option, it's going to give me an error. It's not going to allow it because it's not able to make those proportional changes. Now, this proportional change does also work with 2D curves. So for example, if I use proportional, I can have a general change to the curve itself. Keep in mind with this update, move as well as rotate and scale also have these orientation options and pivot options. So one of the nice things that we have now is if we are to, let's say, move this entire body and I reset the pivot, that pivot point is now saved in this orientation, which means if I invoke the move command again, it can save that pivot point. So for example, if I start move again and it's set to active, it can use the active selected pivot point that we've set. So that's a nice option. And again, that's common across move, rotate, and scale. So if we're to use rotate, you can see the orientation options. And if we use scale, they're there as well. While we've got these sort of CVs visible, let's also talk a little bit about, let me hide this one first. Let's talk a little bit about raise degree and toggle points. So typically if we're going to make a change to say this face right here, we would select the face and we would use raise degree. This is going to be it's going to be the shortcut key Shift and S. But what this does is it allows us to increase the number of CVs that we can then manually change. In the past, you had to have that face selected, but now raise degree as well as toggle points works with just having a CV selected. So now if I want to make changes to this face, I can go ahead and move these out. I need to make sure I'm not on proportional editing. But then with them selected, I can go to toggle points and I can turn those CVs off without having the entire face selected. Now, if you have the entire body selected and we go to toggle points, it will be able to turn off anything that's a part of that. This face is still independent and not joined, so I would need to join those together. And then again, toggle points to get rid of those. So that's just a minor change that happened. But for the most part, when you're using raise degree and toggle points, you're moving those CVs around and they're selected so that when you're done, if you have a shortcut key for, say, toggling points, you don't have to go back and reselect an entire face. You can just simply use that command. Let's also talk a little bit about the changes to sheet extension. So if I select an edge of the sheet and I start to pull it out, the new option we have here is called natural, which is going to create this untrimmed surface. The other options, linear, soft, and reflective, have already been here. Notice there's a modify toggle. So this means that we can add a new surface or we can modify the existing. But this natural option allows us to go back to an untrimmed state of that surface. Another thing that we want to talk a little bit about is curve rebuilds. So one of the things that we have when we rebuild a curve is we now have access to explicit control. And explicit control in this case, if we increase things like the degree here, we have a weight toggle And the weight toggle with the increase in degree allows us to do some pretty interesting things, giving us the ability to flatten out certain sections. So using the weight, which is going to pull or increase the amount of influence that each of these CVs or the sections here have, and then using the explicit control gives us just a different way that we can rebuild these curves. Another thing that has happened in 2025 is the ability to do a tan-tan line or a tan-tan curve between ellipses and splines. So this is something that we could only do really between arcs before, but now there's going to be a snap location for tan-tan. The reason this is important is because now it gives us the ability to create these complex splines, and we can add other curves between them with that tangent relationship and then trim them away. And the last thing that I want to mention here, I'm going to go ahead and rebuild this curve, is the ability to snap to CVs. So it's a new option that we have here under Control Point, and we have the ability to now snap to those CVs. If you want to toggle that off to go back to how it behaved in 2024 version, then we can snap directly to the curve, but we aren't going to be snapping to a CV unless it's the start or end point. So that's going to be the extent of the updates, the new tools, and the changes to Plasticity for 2025. There are a few more things that I didn't really cover, but I will put a link to the Plasticity website where they talk about everything that has changed or updated. If you have any questions on this, anything that you saw here, or Plasticity in general, leave a comment. If you are looking to purchase Plasticity, we are an affiliate. You can use the code LEAD10 at checkout. That'll save you 10% off the purchase price of Indie or Studio and does help out the channel. Now, if you are looking to upgrade, unfortunately, the affiliate link doesn't do anything for you there, but we do appreciate it if you are purchasing it. It does help out. And last, if you are looking for content, we do have plenty of videos and playlists on this channel if you're looking to get started in Plasticity, and we will be redoing or updating some of that content for this new version 25.1. So once again, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.